Friends, welcome back. I want to talk to you today about something that is happening right now, something that is being reported in the business press, but that is not being understood for what it really is. We are watching a profound historic shift in the way the global capitalist economy is organized, and it is happening right on the northern border of the United States. It is a story about trade, yes. It is a story about tariffs and electric vehicles and soybeans. But deep down, it is a story about the decline of an empire that has forgotten how to function and the panic that sets in when the rest of the world stops waiting for permission to survive. We have to look at this situation involving Donald Trump, the United States, and Canada, and we have to strip away the personalities. We have to look at the structural reality of what is going on. The report from Bloomberg this week that Donald Trump is privately asking his aides if he should tear up the USMCA, the trade agreement he himself signed, is not just a tantrum. It is a symptom. It is a symptom of an economic system in the United States that is so fragile, so dependent on bullying its partners to maintain its dominance, that the moment a partner finds another option, the entire house of cards begins to shake. Let us be very clear about what has happened. For 70 years, since the end of the Second World War, the United States has operated on a very simple premise. The premise was this: we are the market. We are the buyer of last resort. We are the center of the universe. And if you want to sell your goods, if you want to feed your people, if you want your economy to grow, you must come through us. You must play by our rules. That was the deal. It was an unequal deal, a deal born of American hegemony, but it was a stable deal for a long time. Canada, Mexico, Europe, Japan, they all accepted it because the American market was vast and wealthy. But capitalism, as I have told you many times, is a system of contradictions. It is a system that changes. It does not stay still. And the contradiction here is that while the United States was busy financializing its economy, shipping its manufacturing base overseas to boost corporate profits, and neglecting its own infrastructure, other parts of the world were developing. China was developing, the global south was developing, and now in 2026, we have reached a point where the United States is no longer the only game in town. And that terrifies the people in Washington. It terrifies them because their leverage, the power to say, do what we want or we will starve you, is evaporating. Look at what Mark Carney has done in Canada. This is not a radical socialist maneuver, let me assure you. Mark Carney is a central banker. He is a man of the establishment. He ran the Bank of England. He ran the Bank of Canada. He is as much a creature of the global capitalist order as anyone on Wall Street. But even he, even a man of the establishment, can see the writing on the wall. He can see that tying Canada's economic survival entirely to the whims of a chaotic, protectionist United States is a suicide pact. So what did he do? He went to Beijing, he signed a deal, he opened up a new avenue for trade. And the reaction in the United States? Panic, absolute panic. Why? Because the United States assumes that Canada belongs to it economically. The American ruling class views Canada not as a sovereign nation with its own interests, but as a resource colony, a place to extract lumber, oil, and water, and a captive market for American goods. When Canada says, we will trade with China too, it is treated in Washington as a betrayal. It is treated as disobedience. The panic we are seeing from the American agricultural lobby is particularly instructive. These are the organizations representing the farmers in Nebraska, in Wisconsin, in Kansas. These are the people who were told over and over again that free trade deals like NAFTA and the USMCA were good for them. They were told that these deals would open markets and bring prosperity. And to a certain extent, for the large agribusiness corporations, that was true. But now they see the President of the United States threatening to blow it all up. Why are they panicking? Because they know the truth. They know that American agriculture is heavily dependent on exports. They know that if the United States starts a trade war with Canada and Mexico, the people who will suffer are not the hedge fund managers in New York. The people who will suffer are the farmers who cannot sell their corn, who cannot sell their dairy. They are seeing their livelihoods held hostage by a political game they have no control over. They are buying ads on Truth Social, begging the president not to destroy the very agreement he claimed was his greatest achievement. This is the irrationality of the system on full display. You have a president who claims to represent the forgotten man, the worker, the farmer, and yet his policies, driven by a desire to project strength, to be the tough guy on the world stage, are directly threatening the economic survival of those very people. And you have an agricultural lobby that is usually very conservative, very supportive of the Republican Party, now desperately trying to stop their own leader from driving the car off the cliff. It is a mess, but it is a mess with a history. We have to understand how we got here. We have to go back and look at how trade has been used as a weapon and how the contradictions of neoliberal globalization have finally come home to roost. For 40 years, we were told that globalization would lift all boats. We were told that if we just lowered tariffs, deregulated capital flows, and let the market decide where goods should be produced, everyone would be better off. Well, look around you. Is everyone better off? The working class in the United States has been decimated. Their wages have stagnated. Their factories have closed. And now, the very same political forces that pushed for this globalization are turning against it, not to help the workers, but to engage in a kind of economic nationalism that is just as destructive. Trump wants to put up walls. He wants to use tariffs as a bludgeon. He thinks that if he makes it expensive enough for Canada to trade with China, Canada will come crawling back. But that is a miscalculation. It is a miscalculation born of arrogance. It assumes that the United States is still the hegemon it was in 1950. It assumes that Canada has nowhere else to go. But as this recent deal with China shows, Canada does have somewhere else to go. The world is multipolar now. There are other centers of power. There are other markets. And countries like Canada, faced with an unpredictable and hostile neighbor, are going to do what any rational actor in a capitalist system would do. They are going to diversify. They are going to hedge their bets. The deal involving electric vehicles is symbolic of this deeper shift. The United States is terrified of Chinese electric vehicles. Why? Because they are cheaper, because they are efficient, because China invested in the technology while the American auto giants were busy buying back their own stock and lobbying against fuel efficiency standards. The American response is not to compete by making better, cheaper cars. No, the response is to ban the competition, to put up a 100% tariff, to build a wall around the American market, and force American consumers to buy more expensive, less advanced products. This is protectionism in its most crude form, and now they want Canada to do the same. They want Canada to join them behind the wall. They want Canada to cut itself off from cheap green technology just to protect the profits of Ford and General Motors. And when Canada says, no, thank you, we would like to have affordable electric buses for our cities, we would like to sell our canola to China, the United States reacts with fury. This is the behavior of a declining power, A confident power competes, a fearful power bullies. And right now, the United States is a fearful power. It is afraid of China's economic rise. It is afraid of losing its grip on the North American continent. And in its fear, it is lashing out in ways that are self destructive. Consider the absurdity of the situation. You have American farmers, the backbone of the rural economy, pleading with their president not to start a trade war with their biggest customers. You have the president's trade representative suggesting that the U.S. should be paid just for allowing goods to enter the country, a concept that is closer to feudal tribute than modern economics. And you have a Canadian leader, Mark Carney, quietly building a coalition that makes American threats irrelevant. The irony is thick. The United States spent decades preaching the virtues of free markets to the rest of the world. Open your markets, they said. Let competition reign. And now, when the competition is not going their way, they want to shut it all down. They want to change the rules in the middle of the game, but the rest of the world is not obliged to play along. What we are witnessing is the unraveling of the North American economic zone as a unified bloc under U.S. command. For 30 years since NAFTA was signed, the economies of the U.S., Canada, and Mexico have been deeply integrated. Supply chains cross the border back and forth. A car might be assembled in Michigan with parts from Ontario and Mexico. This integration was supposed to be permanent. It was supposed to be the bedrock of North American prosperity. But capitalism destroys its own creations. The drive for profit, the drive for dominance, eventually undermines the very stability that capitalism needs to function. The USMCA, which replaced NAFTA, was supposed to modernize this relationship. Trump signed it. He bragged about it. He called it the best deal ever. And now, less than 6 years later, he wants to tear it up. Why? Because it constrains him, because it has rules. And an empire in decline does not like rules. It wants the freedom to act arbitrarily. But arbitrary action has consequences. The farmers know this. The manufacturers know this. Uncertainty is poison to investment. If you are a business owner, how can you plan for the future if you don't know if the border will be open next month? How can you sign a contract if you don't know if a tweet from the president will impose a 25% tariff tomorrow? This chaos, this unpredictability is a hallmark of the current phase of American capitalism. It is a system that has lost its rudder. The historical parallel here is striking. Think back to the British Empire in the early 20th century. As Britain's economic dominance waned, as Germany and the United States rose, Britain tried to retreat into an imperial preference system, a closed trade bloc with its colonies. They tried to shut out the rising competitors. It didn't work. It only accelerated their decline. It only alienated their partners. The United States is attempting a similar retreat today. It is trying to turn North America into a fortress. But Canada is not a colony in the 19th century sense. It is a modern capitalist economy with its own contradictions and its own imperatives. The Canadian ruling class is split. Some want to cling to the U.S., terrified of angering the giant. But others, represented by this move from Carney, see that the U.S. is a sinking ship, or at least a ship that is steering dangerously close to the rocks. They want a lifeboat, and that lifeboat, ironically, is China. This is not about ideology for them. It is about business. It is about survival. If the U.S. market is closing, if the U.S. government is hostile, they must find buyers elsewhere. And China is the biggest buyer in the world. This is the reality of the global market that the U.S. helped create. You cannot integrate the world economy for 40 years and then expect to snap your fingers and have everyone retreat back into national silos just because it suits your political timeline. The panic of the 40 agricultural organizations is the sound of the chickens coming home to roost. For years, these organizations supported policies that favored corporate consolidation, that squeezed out small farmers, that made agriculture dependent on massive export volumes. They bought into the neoliberal model, and now that model is collapsing under the weight of geopolitical rivalry. They are caught in the crossfire. They are the collateral damage of a trade war that has nothing to do with their well-being and everything to do with great power competition. We must also look at the labor aspect of this. Who does the work? Who actually produces the value? It is the farm workers, many of them migrants in the US. It is the auto workers in Ontario and Michigan and Mexico. They are the ones who will pay the price for this conflict. If tariffs go up, prices go up, real wages go down. If trade wars lead to layoffs, it is the workers who lose their jobs, not the politicians. The rhetoric from Washington is all about protecting American jobs. But let us be honest, Trump's threat to tear up the USMCA is not about protecting the worker on the assembly line. It is about political leverage. It is about forcing Canada to align with US foreign policy against China. It is a geopolitical move dressed up as economic policy, and the workers are just pawns in this game. When we see the Agricultural Coalition for USMCA running ads on Truth Social, we are seeing a fracture in the ruling coalition of the United States. The capitalist class is not unified. One section, the tech sector, the military-industrial complex, might want to confront China, but another section, agriculture, retail, consumer goods, depends on global trade and stability. They are fighting each other, and when the ruling class fights amongst itself, the system becomes unstable. This instability creates openings, but it also creates danger. The danger is that in their desperation, the leaders of the dying order will lash out more violently. Economic war can easily turn into other kinds of war. The rhetoric becomes heated. Neighbors become enemies. The other is demonized. We are seeing this already with the way China is talked about, and now increasingly the way Canada is being talked about in certain circles. So as we watch this drama unfold, as we watch the panicked meetings in the West Wing and the desperate lobbying campaigns, let us remember what we are really seeing. We are seeing the limits of power. We are seeing that you cannot run a global economy by fiat. You cannot command the tides to stop. The world is changing. The centers of economic gravity are shifting, and the United States, for all its military might, for all its wealth, cannot stop that shift. It can only choose how to adapt to it. And right now, under this leadership, it is choosing poorly. It is choosing denial. It is choosing aggression. And the results, as we are seeing, are chaos, panic, and a deepening crisis for the very people the system claims to serve. This is the nature of the beast. This is capitalism in its late decadent phase, eating its own tail, threatening its own partners, and stumbling blindly into a future it no longer controls. I will continue with this analysis in the next part, where we will look deeper into the specific mechanics of this trade deal and what it means for the working class in all three countries. Stay with me. We looked at the panic currently gripping Washington, the realization that the United States can no longer simply snap its fingers and dictate the economic destiny of its neighbors. We saw how Donald Trump, the self-proclaimed master dealmaker, is now threatening to tear up his own trade agreement, the USMCA, or CUSMA, as the Canadians call it, because Canada dared to sign a deal with China. We saw the American agricultural lobby, usually a bastion of conservative support, begging the president to stop before he destroys their livelihoods. Now, I want to take you deeper. I want to look under the hood of this crisis, Because what is happening here is not just a political spat, it is a collision between the fantasy of economic nationalism and the hard reality of global capitalist production. And as always, the people who are going to get crushed in this collision are not the billionaires in Mar-a-Lago or the bureaucrats in Ottawa. It is the working class in the United States, in Canada, and in Mexico. Let's start with the specific mechanics of what Trump is threatening. The USMCA has a mandatory review coming up in July 2026. This was a clause inserted, ironically, by the Americans themselves to keep their partners on a short leash. The idea was to create permanent uncertainty, to force Canada and Mexico to constantly beg for renewal. But here is the contradiction. Uncertainty is poison to capitalism. So what does he do? He hedges his risk. He goes to the next biggest customer, China. The deal to allow Chinese electric vehicles into Canada is not an ideological embrace of communism. It is a practical recognition that China now produces high quality, affordable green technology that the West needs. The United States, having failed to invest in its own infrastructure and having allowed its auto companies to focus on high margin gas guzzlers for decades, is now way behind. The American response to being behind is not to innovate, it is to bully. They want to ban Chinese cars not because they are bad, but because they are too good and too cheap. They threaten the profits of Ford and GM. And they want Canada to join this blockade. They want Canadian workers to pay more for cars and Canadian cities to pay more for electric buses just to protect the market share of American corporations. Carney said no. He said essentially, we will trade with everyone. This is the sovereignty argument, but notice something important. This sovereignty is still dictated by the logic of capital. Canada is pivoting to China not to build socialism, but to maintain the profitability of Canadian capitalism. They want to sell their canola, they want to sell their minerals. But here is where the class analysis becomes crucial. While the American and Canadian ruling classes fight over who gets to sell what to whom, what happens to the worker? If Trump starts a trade war and tariffs go up, we will see a spike in inflation in the United States. Real wages, which have already been stagnant for decades, will fall further as the cost of living rises. We will see layoffs in the auto sector and the agricultural sector as exports dry up. The American worker is being told that this is a battle for freedom or national pride. Do not believe it. It is a battle between different factions of capital, and you are the foot soldiers. If you are a worker in the auto industry in Michigan, you are told that Chinese EVs are the enemy. You are told that they will steal your job. But let's look at the reality. Your job has been under attack for 40 years, not by China, but by your own employers. General Motors and Ford have moved production to Mexico, to Brazil, to anywhere labor is cheaper. They have replaced you with robots. They have cut your pensions. They have fought your unions. And now they want you to hate China too. The threat to the American worker is not the Chinese worker making an electric car. The threat is the American CEO who refuses to invest in technology, who prioritizes stock buybacks over wages, and who now wants the government to build a wall around the country so he can continue to sell inferior products at monopoly prices. And what about the Canadian worker? They might get cheaper electric cars, which is good, but they are also seeing their economy become a battleground. If the U.S. retaliates, which Trump is threatening to do, Canada could face a recession. Canadian workers in industries that depend on the U.S. market could lose their jobs. They are caught between two giants. This is the tragedy of the current moment. We have a global system that is cracking apart. The old order, dominated by the U.S., is failing, A new multipolar order is emerging, but the transition is dangerous. It is fraught with conflict, and in every country, the ruling class tries to deflect the anger of the people onto foreigners. Blame Canada, blame China, blame the Mexicans. They do this to hide the fact that the system itself is the problem, the system that prioritizes profit over people, the system that treats food, shelter, and transportation as commodities rather than rights, the system that inevitably leads to these kinds of trade wars because it is built on ruthless competition rather than cooperation. When we see the U.S. Trade Representative suggesting that the U.S. should be compensated for access to its market, we are seeing the logic of a landlord. The U.S. is acting like a rentier. This is my property. Pay me to enter. This is not the behavior of a productive, dynamic economy. It is the behavior of a declining power trying to extract value through force and coercion rather than creating value through production. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a stark choice. We can buy into the nationalism. We can wave the flag and support the trade wars. We can cheer when our side imposes tariffs. But if we do that, we are cheering for our own impoverishment. We are cheering for higher prices and more instability. Or we can recognize that the working class has no country. We can recognize that a worker in Detroit has more in common with a worker in Windsor, Ontario, or a worker in Shanghai than they do with Donald Trump or Mark Carney. We can demand a different kind of trade that is based on raising standards for everyone, not a race to the bottom. Trade that respects the environment. Trade that is planned and managed for the public good, not the profit of the few. But that requires a political movement that does not exist yet in strength. Until then, we must watch this spectacle with clear eyes. We must understand that when the elephants fight, when the US and China and Canada clash over trade deals, it is the grass that gets trampled, and we, the workers, are the grass. In the next part, I want to discuss the political fallout of this, because this economic panic is going to spill over into the political arena in ways that are very dangerous. We are already seeing the rhetoric heat up. We are seeing alliances shift. And we need to understand what this means for the future of democracy itself in North America.